What's up, folks? I'm Dan, and welcome to I've Been Meaning to Read That, the show where I read books out loud that I've been meaning to read. Let's go. Folks, I need to apologize, mainly to myself, for how late I'm starting recording on this episode. It was 11:45, and I thought, let me just make a quick cup of coffee before I head down to the studio. And I looked, and we're at a friend's house, and the Keurig was out of K-Cups. Not my first choice, but it is fast. And, I walk a lot, so I make up for it, carbon footprint-wise. And I thought, that's no problem. I'll use the little Mr. Coffee. Couldn't find it anywhere. Not on the counter, not in the closets, nowhere to be seen. So then I thought, there's ground coffee, there's filters, there's mugs. There should be a way for an intelligent, college-educated individual like myself to be able to make coffee if I have grounds and filters. And so I looked it up, and Food Network says just mix it in a bowl, right, your hot water and your grounds, and then use like a tablespoon or a cup, a measuring cup, and scoop it, pour it over a filter that you have held onto your mug. And I thought, easy peasy. The filters did not want to filter. I could not get any liquid through these filters, and they're the right filters. I use them all the time in the Mr. Coffee when I can find it. And I thought, you know what? I am watching a fun video here on YouTube, and I'm just going to wait. I'm going to be patient. Because if the only ingredient that I'm missing for making coffee without a coffee maker or a pour over or an AeroPress or something is patience, well, I'm a grown up. I can have patience. And there was a lot of coffee grounds and just vaguely brown liquid all over the counter by the time I was done. I had used quite a few paper towels, several actual filters, and my reward was a 80% full mug of very crunchy coffee. And by the time I was done making it, the water wasn't even hot anymore, so I had to throw it back in the microwave, and then it was too hot. And then my first sip, just grounds all up in my teeth. Just horrible. Now, before I forget, I do want to add that I am officially all connected up with Spotify. They made some updates for podcasters, and you all can leave comments. So if you are digging the show, feel free to leave me a comment. Let me know what you like, what you don't like, what I can improve, etc. If you want to compare me in voice or appearance to George Clooney, that's your prerogative, but I won't be upset. All right, without further ado, The Count of Monte Cristo. Chapter 65, A Conjugal Scene. At the place Louis XV, the three young people separated. That is to say, Morel went to the Boulevards, Chateau Renaud to the Pont de la Révolution, and Debray to the Quai. Most probably, Morel and Chateau Renaud returned to their domestic hearths, as they say in the gallery of the Chamber in well-turned speeches, and in the theatre of the Rue Richelieu in well-written pieces. But it was not the case with Debray. When he reached the wicket of the Louvre, he turned to the left, galloped across the Carrousel, passed through the Rue Saint-Roch, and, issuing from the Rue de la Michaudière, he arrived at Monsieur Danglars' door just at the same time that Villefort's landau, after having deposited him and his wife at the Faubourg Saint-Honoré, stopped to leave the Baroness at her own house. Debray, with the air of a man familiar with the house, entered first into the court, threw his bridle into the hands of a footman, and returned to the door to receive Madame Danglars, to whom he offered his arm to conduct her to her apartments. The gate once closed, and Debray and the Baroness alone in the court, he asked, "What was the matter with you, Hermione? And why were you so affected at that story, or rather fable, which the Count related?" "Because I have been in such shocking spirits all the evening, my friend," said the Baroness. "No, Hermione," replied Debray, "you cannot make me believe that. On the contrary, you were in excellent spirits when you arrived at the Count's. Monsieur Danglars was disagreeable, certainly, but I know how much you care for his ill humor. Someone has vexed you. I will allow no one to annoy you." "You are deceived, Lucien, I assure you," replied Madame Danglars. "And what I have told you is really the case, added to the ill humor you remarked, but which I did not think it worth while to allude to." It was evident that Madame Danglars was suffering from that nervous irritability which women frequently cannot account for, even to themselves, or that, as Debray had guessed, she had experienced some secret agitation that she would not acknowledge to anyone. Being a man who knew that the former of these symptoms was one of the inherent penalties of womanhood, he did not then press his inquiries, but waited for a more appropriate opportunity when he should again interrogate her, or receive an avowal proprio motu. At the door of her apartment, the Baroness met Mademoiselle Cornélie, her confidential maid. "What is my daughter doing?" asked Madame Danglars. "She practiced all the evening and then went to bed," replied Mademoiselle Cornélie. "Yet I think I hear her piano." "It is Mademoiselle Louise d'Armilly, who is playing while Mademoiselle Danglars is in bed." "Well," said Madame Danglars, "come and undress me." They entered the bedroom. Debray stretched himself upon a large couch, and Madame Danglars passed into her dressing room with Mademoiselle Cornélie. "My dear Lucien," said Madame Danglars through the door, "you are always complaining that Eugenie will not address a word to you." "Madame," said Lucien, playing with a little dog who, recognizing him as a friend of the house, expected to be caressed, "I am not the only one who makes similar complaints. I think I heard Morcerf say that he could not extract a word from his betrothed." "True," said Madame Danglars. "Yet I think this will all pass off, and that you will one day see her enter your study." "My study?" "At least that of the minister." "Why so?" "To ask for an engagement at the opera. Really, I never saw such an infatuation for music. It is quite ridiculous for a young lady of fashion." Debray smiled. "Well," said he, "let her come, with your consent and that of the Baron, and we will try and give her an engagement, though we are very poor to pay such talent as hers." "Go, Cornélie," said Madame Danglars. "I do not require you any longer." Cornélie obeyed, and the next minute Madame Danglars left her room in a charming, loose dress, and came and sat down close to Debray. Then she began thoughtfully to caress the little spaniel. Lucien looked at her for a moment in silence. "Come, Hermione," he said, after a short time. "Answer candidly. Something vexes you, is it not so?" "Nothing," answered the Baroness. And yet, as she could scarcely breathe, she rose and went towards a looking-glass. "I am frightful tonight," she said. Debray rose, smiling, and was about to contradict the Baroness upon this latter point, when the door opened suddenly. Monsieur Danglars appeared. Debray reseated himself. At the noise of the door, Madame Danglars turned round, and looked upon her husband with an astonishment she took no trouble to conceal. "Good evening, madame," said the banker. "Good evening, Monsieur Debray." Probably the Baroness thought this unexpected visit signified a desire to make up for the sharp words he had uttered during the day. Assuming a dignified air, she turned round to Debray without answering her husband. "Read me something, Monsieur Debray," she said. Debray, who was slightly disturbed at this visit, recovered himself when he saw the calmness of the Baroness, and took up a book marked by a mother-of-pearl knife inlaid with gold. "Excuse me," said the banker, "but you will tire yourself, Baroness, by such late hours, and Monsieur Debray lives some distance from here." Debray was petrified, not only to hear Danglars speak so calmly and politely, but because it was apparent that beneath outward politeness there really lurked a determined spirit of opposition to anything his wife might wish to do. The Baroness was also surprised, and showed her astonishment by a look which would doubtless have had some effect upon her husband if he had not been intently occupied with the paper, where he was looking to see the closing stock quotations. The result was that the proud look entirely failed of its purpose. "Monsieur Lucien," said the Baroness, "I assure you I have no desire to sleep, and that I have 1,000 things to tell you this evening, which you must listen to, even though you slept while hearing me." "I am at your service, madame," replied Lucien coldly. "My dear Monsieur Debray," said the banker, Do not kill yourself tonight listening to the follies of Madame Danglars, for you can hear them as well tomorrow. But I claim tonight, and will devote it, if you will allow me, to talk over some serious matters with my wife." This time the blow was so well aimed and hit so directly that Lucien and the Baroness were staggered, and they interrogated each other with their eyes, as if to seek help against this aggression. But the irresistible will of the master of the house prevailed, and the husband was victorious. "Do not think I wish to turn you out, my dear Debray," continued Danglars. No, not at all. An unexpected occurrence forces me to ask my wife to have a little conversation with me. It is so rarely I make such a request, I am sure you cannot grudge it to me." Debray muttered something, bowed, and went out, knocking himself against the edge of the door like Nathan and Athalie. "It is extraordinary," he said, when the door was closed behind him, "how easily these husbands, whom we ridicule, gain an advantage over us." Lucien having left, Danglars took his place on the sofa, closed the open book, and placing himself in a dreadfully dictatorial attitude, he began playing with the dog. But the animal, not liking him as well as Debray, and attempting to bite him, Danglars seized him by the skin of his neck and threw him upon a couch on the other side of the room. The animal uttered a cry during the transit, but, arrived at its destination, it crouched behind the cushions, and stupefied at such unusual treatment, remained silent and motionless. "Do you know, sir," asked the Baroness, "that you are improving? Generally you are only rude, but tonight you are brutal." "It is because I am in a worse humor than usual," replied Danglars. Hermione looked at the banker with supreme disdain. These glances frequently exasperated the pride of Danglars, but this evening he took no notice of them. "And what have I to do with your ill humor?" asked the Baroness, irritated at the impassibility of her husband. "Do these things concern me? Keep your ill humor at home in your money boxes, or, since you have clerks whom you pay, vent it upon them." "Not so," replied Danglars. "Your advice is wrong, so I shall not follow it. My money boxes are my pactolus, as I think Monsieur de Moustier says, and I will not retard its course or disturb its calm. My clerks are honest men who earn my fortune, whom I pay much below their deserts, if I may value them according to what they bring in. Therefore, I shall not get into a passion with them. Those with whom I will be in a passion are those who eat my dinners, mount my horses, and exhaust my fortune." "And pray, who are the persons who exhaust your fortune? Explain yourself more clearly, I beg, sir." "Oh, make yourself easy. I am not speaking riddles, and you will soon know what I mean. The people who exhaust my fortune are those who draw out 700,000 francs in the course of an hour." "I do not understand you, sir," said the Baroness, trying to disguise the agitation of her voice and the flush of her face. "You understand me perfectly, on the contrary," said Danglars. "But if you will persist, I will tell you that I have just lost 700,000 francs upon the Spanish loan." "And pray," asked the Baroness, "am I responsible for this?" "Why not?" "Is it my fault you have lost 700,000 francs?" "Certainly it is not mine." "Once for all, sir," replied the Baroness sharply, "I tell you I will not hear cash named. It is a style of language I never heard in the house of my parents, or in that of my first husband." "Oh, I can well believe that, for neither of them was worth a penny." "The better reason for my not being conversant with the slang of the bank, which is here dinning in my ears from morning to night, that noise of jingling crowns which are constantly being counted and recounted, is odious to me. I only know one thing I dislike more, which is the sound of your voice." "Really?" said Danglars. "Well, this surprises me, for I thought you took the liveliest interest in all my affairs." "I? What could put such an idea into your head?" "Yourself." What next?" "Most assuredly." "I should like to know upon what occasion?" "Oh, mon Dieu, that is very easily done. Last February you were the first who told me of the Haitian funds. You had dreamed that a ship had entered the harbor at Le Havre, that this ship brought news that a payment we had looked upon as lost was going to be made. I know how clear-sighted your dreams are. I therefore purchased immediately as many shares as I could of the Haitian debt, and I gained 400,000 francs by it, of which 100,000 have been honestly paid to you. You spent it as you please. That was your business. In March, there was a question about a grant to a railway. 3 companies presented themselves, each offering equal securities. You told me that your instinct, and although you pretend to know nothing about speculations, I think, on the contrary, that your comprehension is very clear upon certain affairs. Well, you told me that your instinct led you to believe the grant would be given to the company called the Southern. I bought 2/3 of the shares of that company. As you had foreseen, the shares trebled in value, and I picked up $1 million, from which 250,000 francs were paid to you for pin money. How have you spent this 200,000 francs? It is no business of mine." "When are you coming to the point?" cried the Baroness, shivering with anger and impatience. "Patience, madame, I am coming to it." "That's fortunate." "In April you went to dine at the minister's. You heard a private conversation respecting Spanish affairs, on the expulsion of Don Carlos. I bought some Spanish shares. The expulsion took place, and I pocketed 600,000 francs the day Charles V repassed the Bidosa. Of these 600,000 francs you took 50,000 crowns. They were yours, you disposed of them according to your fancy, and I asked no questions. But it is not the less true that you have this year received 500,000 livres." "Well, sir, and what then?" "Ah, yes, it was just after this that you spoiled everything." "Really, your manner of speaking—" "It expresses my meaning, and that is all I want. Well, 3 days after that you talked politics with Monsieur Debray, and you fancied from his words that Don Carlos had returned to Spain. Well, I sold my shares, the news got out, and I no longer sold. I gave them away. Next day I find the news was false, and by this false report I have lost 700,000 francs. "Well?" "Well, since I gave you 1/4 of my gains, I think you owe me 1/4 of my losses. The 1/4 of 700,000 francs is 175,000. "What you say is absurd, and I cannot see why Monsieur Debray's name is mixed up in this affair." "Because if you do not possess the 175,000 francs I reclaim, you must have lent them to your friends, and Monsieur Debray is one of your friends." "For shame!" exclaimed the Baroness. "Oh, let us have no gestures, no screams, no modern drama, or you will oblige me to tell you that I see Debray leave here, pocketing the whole of the 500,000 livres you have handed over to him this year, while he smiles to himself, saying that he has found what the most skillful players have never discovered, that is, a roulette where he wins without playing and is no loser when he loses." The Baroness became enraged. "Wretch!" she cried. "Will you dare to tell me you did not know what you now reproach me with?" "I do not say that I did know it, and I do not say that I did not know it. I merely tell you to look into my conduct during the last 4 years that we have ceased to be husband and wife, and see whether it has not always been consistent. Some time after our rupture, you wished to study music under the celebrated baritone who made such a successful appearance at the Théâtre Italien. At the same time, I felt inclined to learn dancing of the danseuse who acquired such a reputation in London. This cost me, on your account and mine, 100,000 francs. I said nothing, for we must have peace in the house, and 100,000 francs for a lady and gentleman to be properly instructed in music and dancing are not too much. Well, you soon become tired of singing, and you take a fancy to study diplomacy with the minister's secretary. You understand it signifies nothing to me so long as you pay for your lessons out of your own cash box. But today, I find you are drawing on mine, and that your apprenticeship may cost me 700,000 francs per month. Stop there, madame, for this cannot last. Either the diplomatist must give his lessons gratis, and I will tolerate him, or he must never set his foot again in my house. Do you understand, madame?" "Oh, this is too much," cried Hermione, choking. "You are worse than despicable." "But," continued Danglars, "I find you did not even pause there." "Insults!" "You are right. Let us leave these facts alone and reason coolly. I have never interfered in your affairs excepting for your good. Treat me in the same way. You say you have nothing to do with my cash box, be it so. Do as you like with your own, but do not fill or empty mine. Besides, how do I know that this was not a political trick, that the minister, enraged at seeing me in the opposition, and jealous of the popular sympathy I excite, has not concerted with Monsieur Debray to ruin me?" "A probable thing." "Why not? Who ever heard of such an occurrence as this? A false telegraphic dispatch. It is almost impossible for wrong signals to be made as they were in the last 2 telegrams. It was done on purpose for me. I am sure of it." "Sir," said the Baroness humbly, Are you not aware that the man employed there was dismissed, that they talked of going to law with him, that orders were issued to arrest him, and that this order would have been put into execution as if he had not escaped by flight, which proves that he was either mad or guilty? It was a mistake. Yes, which made fools laugh, which caused the minister to have a sleepless night, which has caused the minister's secretaries to blacken several sheets of paper, but which has cost me 700,000 francs. But, sir, said Hermione suddenly, if all this is, as you say, caused by Monsieur Debray, why, instead of going direct to him, do you come and tell me of it? Why, to accuse the man, do you address the woman? Do I know Debray? Do I wish to know him? Do I wish to know that he gives advice? Do I wish to follow it? Do I speculate? No. You do all this, not I. Still it seems to me that as you profit by it— Danglars shrugged his shoulders. Foolish creature, he exclaimed. Women fancy they have talent because they have managed 2 or 3 intrigues without being the talk of Paris. But know that if you had even hidden your irregularities from your husband, who is but the commencement of the art, for generally husbands will not see, you would then have been but a faint imitation of most of your friends among the women of the world. But it has not been so with me. I see, and always have seen during the last 16 years. You may perhaps have hidden a thought, but not a step, not an action, not a fault has escaped me. Well, you flattered yourself upon your address, and firmly believed you had deceived me. What has been the result? That, thanks to my pretended ignorance, there is none of your friends, from de Villefort to Debray, who has not trembled before me. There is not one who has not treated me as the master of the house. The only title I desire with respect to you. There is not one, in fact, who would have dared to speak of me as I have spoken of them this day. I will allow you to make me hateful, but I will prevent your rendering me ridiculous, and above all, I forbid you to ruin me. The Baroness had been tolerably composed until the name of Villefort had been pronounced, but then she became pale, and rising, as if touched by a spring, she stretched out her hands as though conjuring an apparition. She then took 2 or 3 steps towards her husband, as though to tear the secret from him, of which he was ignorant, or which he withheld from some odious calculation. Odious, as all his calculations were. De Villefort? What do you mean? I mean that Monsieur de Nargonne, your first husband, being neither a philosopher nor a banker, or perhaps being both, and seeing there was nothing to be got out of a king's attorney, died of grief or anger at finding, after an absence of 9 months, that you had been enceinte 6. I am brutal. I do not only allow it, but boast of it. It is one of the reasons of my success in commercial business. Why did he kill himself instead of you? Because he had no cash to save. My life belongs to my cash. Debray has made me lose 700,000 francs. Let him bear his share of the loss, and we will go on as before. If not, let him become bankrupt for the 250,000 livres, and do as all bankrupts do. Disappear. He is a charming fellow, I allow, when his news is correct, but when it is not, there are 50 others in the world who would do better than he. Madame Danglars was rooted to the spot. She made a violent effort to reply to this last attack, but she fell upon a chair thinking of Villefort, of the dinner scene, of the strange series of misfortunes which had taken place in her house during the last few days, and changed the usual calm of her establishment to a scene of scandalous debate. Danglars did not even look at her, though she did her best to faint. He shut the door after him without adding another word, and returned to his apartments, and when Madame Danglars recovered from her half-fainting condition, she could almost believe that she had had a disagreeable dream. End of Chapter 65. Chapter 66. Matrimonial Projects. The day followed this scene. At the hour the banker usually chose to pay a visit to Madame Danglars on his way to his office, his coupe did not appear. At this time, that is, about 12:30, Madame Danglars ordered her carriage and went out. Danglars, hidden behind a curtain, watched the departure he had been waiting for. He gave orders that he should be informed as soon as Madame Danglars appeared, but at 2:00 she had not returned. He then called for his horses, drove to the chamber, and inscribed his name to speak against the budget. From 12 to 2:00 Danglars had remained in his study, unsealing his dispatches, and becoming more and more sad every minute. heaping figure upon figure, and receiving, among other visits, one from Major Cavalcanti, who, as stiff and exact as ever, presented himself precisely at the hour named the night before, to terminate his business with the banker. On leaving the chamber, Danglars, who had shown violent marks of agitation during the sitting, and been more bitter than ever against the ministry, re-entered his carriage and told the coachman to drive to the Avenue des Champs-Élysées, number 30. Monte Cristo was at home, only he was engaged with someone and begged Danglars to wait for a moment in the drawing-room. While the banker was waiting in the anteroom, the door opened, and a man dressed as an abbé, and doubtless more familiar with the house than he was, came in, and instead of waiting, merely bowed, passed on to the farther apartments, and disappeared. A minute after, the door by which the priest had entered reopened, and Monte Cristo appeared. "Pardon me," said he, "my dear Baron, but one of my friends, the Abbé Busoni, whom you perhaps saw pass by, has just arrived in Paris. Not having seen him for a long time, I could not make up my mind to leave him sooner, so I hope this will be sufficient reason for my having made you wait." "Nay," said Danglars, "it is my fault. I have chosen my visit at a wrong time, and will retire." "Not at all. On the contrary, be seated. But what is the matter with you? You look careworn. Really, you alarm me. Melancholy in a capitalist, like the appearance of a comet, presages some misfortune to the world." "I have been in ill luck for several days," said Danglars, "and I have heard nothing but bad news." "Indeed," said Monte Cristo. "Have you had another fall at the Bourse?" "No, I am safe for a few days at least. I am only annoyed about a bankrupt of Trieste." "Really? Does it happen to be Jacopo Manfredi?" "Exactly so. Imagine a man who has transacted business with me for I don't know how long, to the amount of 800 or 900,000 francs during the year. Never a mistake or a delay, a fellow who paid like a prince. Well, I was 1,000,000 in advance with him, and now my fine Jacopo Manfredi suspends payment." "Really?" "It is an unheard-of fatality. I draw upon him for 600,000 francs, my bills are returned unpaid, and more than that, I hold bills of exchange signed by him to the value of 400,000 francs, payable at his correspondence in Paris at the end of this month. Today is the 30th. I present them, but my correspondent has disappeared. This, with my Spanish affairs, made a pretty end to the month." "Then you really lost by that affair in Spain?" "Yes. Only 700,000 francs out of my cash box, nothing more." "Why, how could you make such a mistake? Such an old stager." "Oh, it is all my wife's fault. She dreamed Don Carlos had returned to Spain. She believes in dreams. It is magnetism, she says, and when she dreams a thing, it is sure to happen, she assures me. On this conviction, I allow her to speculate, she having her bank and her stockbroker. She speculated and lost. It is true she speculates with her own money, not mine. Nevertheless, you can understand that when 700,000 francs leave the wife's pocket, the husband always finds out. But do you mean to say you have not heard of this? Why, the thing has made a tremendous noise." "Yes, I heard it spoken of, but I did not know the details, and then no one can be more ignorant than I am of the affairs in the Bourse." "Then you do not speculate?" "I? How could I speculate when I already have so much trouble in regulating my income? I should be obliged, besides my steward, to keep a clerk and a boy. But touching these Spanish affairs, I think that the Baroness did not dream the whole of the Don Carlos matter. The papers said something about it, did they not?" "Then you believe the papers?" "I? Not the least in the world. Only I fancied that the honest messenger was an exception to the rule, and that it only announced telegraphic dispatches." "Well, that's what puzzles me," replied Danglars. "The news of the return of Don Carlos was brought by telegraph." "So that," said Monte Cristo, "you have lost nearly 1,700,000 francs this month?" "Not nearly. Indeed, that is exactly my loss." "Diable," said Monte Cristo compassionately. "It is a hard blow for a third-rate fortune." "Third-rate?" said Danglars, rather humble. "What do you mean by that?" "Well, certainly," continued Monte Cristo. "I make 3 assortments in fortune, first, second, and third-rate fortunes. I call those first-rate, which are composed of treasures one possesses under one's hand, such as mines, lands, and funded property, in such states as France, Austria, and England. provided these treasures and property form a total of about 100 million. I call those second-rate fortunes that are gained by manufacturing enterprises, joint stock companies, viceroyalties, and principalities, not drawing more than 1.5 million francs, the whole forming a capital of about 50 million. Finally, I call those third-rate fortunes which are composed of a fluctuating capital, dependent upon the will of others, or upon chances which a bankruptcy involves, or a false telegram shakes, such as banks, speculations of the day. In fact, all operations under the influence of greater or less mischance, the whole bringing in a real or fictitious capital of about 15 million. I think this is about your position, is it not? Confound it. Yes, replied Danglars. The result, then, of 6 more such months as this would be to reduce the third-rate house to despair. Oh, said Danglars, becoming very pale. How you are running on. Let us imagine 7 such months, continued Monte Cristo in the same tone. Tell me, have you ever thought that 7 times 1.7 million francs makes nearly 12 million? No, you have not. Well, you're right, for if you indulged in such reflections, you would never risk your principal, which is, to the speculator, what the skin is to civilized man. We have our clothes, some more splendid than others. This is our credit. But when a man dies, he has only his skin. In the same way, on retiring from business, you have nothing but your real principal of about 5 or 6 million, at the most, for third-rate fortunes are never more than a fourth of what they appear to be, like the locomotive on a railway, the size of which is magnified by the smoke and steam surrounding it. Well, out of the 5 or 6 million which form your real capital, you have just lost nearly 2 million, which must, of course, in the same degree, diminish your credit and fictitious fortune. To follow out my simile, your skin has been opened by bleeding, and this, if repeated 3 or 4 times, will cause death. So pay attention to it, my dear Monsieur Danglars. Do you want money? Do you wish me to lend you some? What a bad calculator you are, exclaimed Danglars, calling to his assistance all his philosophy and dissimulation. I have made money at the same time by speculations which have succeeded. I have made up the loss of blood by nutrition. I lost a battle in Spain. I have been defeated in Trieste. But my naval army in India will have taken some galleons, and my Mexican pioneers will have discovered some mine. Very good, but the wound remains and will reopen at the first loss. No, for I am only embarked in certainties, replied Danglars, with the air of a mountebank sounding his own praises. To involve me, 3 governments must crumble to dust. Well, such things have been. That there should be a famine. Recollect the 7 fat and the 7 lean kine. Or that the sea should become dry, as in the days of Pharaoh, and even then my vessels would become caravans. So much the better. I congratulate you, my dear Monsieur Danglars, said Monte Cristo. I see I was deceived, and that you belong to the class of second-rate fortunes. I think I may aspire to that honor, said Danglars with a smile, which reminded Monte Cristo of the sickly moons which bad artists are so fond of daubing into their pictures of ruin. But while we are speaking of business, Danglars added, pleased to find an opportunity of changing the subject, tell me what I am to do for Major Cavalcanti. Give him money, if he is recommended to you, and the recommendation seems good. Excellent. He presented himself this morning with a bond of 40,000 francs, payable at sight on you, signed by Busoni, and returned by you to me with your endorsement. Of course, I immediately counted him over the 40 banknotes. Monte Cristo nodded his head in token of assent. But that is not all, continued Danglars. He has opened an account with my house for his son. May I ask how much he allows the young man? 5,000 francs per month. 60,000 a year. I thought I was right in believing that Cavalcanti can be a stingy fellow. How can a young man live upon 5,000 a month? But you understand that if the young man should want a few thousand more, do not advance it. The father will never repay. You do not know these ultramontane millionaires. They are regular misers. And by whom were they recommended to you? Oh, by the house of Fenzi, one of the best in Florence. I do not mean to say you will lose, but nevertheless, mind you hold to the terms of the agreement. Would you not trust the Cavalcanti? I? Oh, I would advance 10 million on his signature. I was only speaking in reference to the second-rate fortunes we were mentioning just now. And with all this, how unassuming he is. I should never have taken him for anything more than a mere major. and you would have flattered him, for certainly, as you say, he has no manner. The first time I saw him, he appeared to me like an old lieutenant who has grown moldy under his epaulets. But all the Italians are the same. They are like old Jews when they are not glittering in oriental splendor. The young man is better, said Danglars. Yes, a little nervous, perhaps, but upon the whole he appeared tolerable. I was uneasy about him. Why? Because you met him at my house, just after his introduction into the world, as they told me. He has been traveling with a very severe tutor, and has never been to Paris before. Oh, I believe noblemen marry amongst themselves, do they not? Asked Danglars. They like to unite their fortunes. It's usual, certainly, but Cavalcanti is an original, who does nothing like other people. I cannot help thinking that he has brought his son to France to choose a wife. Do you think so? I'm sure of it. And you have heard his fortune mentioned? Nothing else was talked of. Only some said he was worth millions, and others that he did not possess a farthing. And what is your opinion? I ought not to influence you, sir, because it is only my personal impression. Well, and it is that? My opinion is that all these old podestas, these ancient condottieri, for the Cavalcantis have commanded armies and governed provinces, my opinion, I say, is that they have buried their millions in corners, the secret of which they have transmitted only to their eldest sons, who have done the same from generation to generation. And the proof of this is seen in their yellow and dry appearance, like the florins of the Republic, which, from being constantly gazed upon, have become reflected in them. Certainly, said Danglars, and this is further supported by the fact of their not possessing an inch of land. Very little, at least. I know of none which Cavalcanti possesses, excepting his palace in Lucca. Ah, he has a palace, said Danglars, laughing. Come, that's something. Yes, and more than that, he lets it to the Minister of Finance while he lives in a simple house. As I told you before, I think the old fellow is very close. Come, you do not flatter him. I scarcely know him. I think I have seen him 3 times in my life. All I know relating to him is through Busoni and himself. He was telling me this morning that, tired of letting his property lie dormant in Italy, which is a dead nation, he wishes to find a method, either in France or England, of multiplying his millions. But remember, that though I place great confidence in Busoni, I am not responsible for this. Never mind. Accept my thanks for the client you have sent me. It is a fine name to inscribe on my ledgers, and my cashier was quite proud of it when I explained to him who the Cavalcanti were. By the way, this is merely a simple question. When this sort of people marry their sons, do they give them any fortune? Oh, that depends upon circumstances. I know an Italian prince, rich as a gold mine, one of the noblest families in Tuscany, who, when his sons married, according to his wish, gave them millions, and when they married against his consent, merely allowed them 30 crowns a month. Should Andrea marry according to his father's views, he will, perhaps, give him 1, 2, or 3 millions. For example, supposing it were the daughter of a banker, he might take an interest in the house of the father-in-law of his son. Then again, if he disliked his choice, the major takes the key, double-locks his coffer, and Master Andrea would be obliged to live like the sons of a Parisian family, by shuffling cards or rattling the dice. That boy will find out some Bavarian or Peruvian princess. He will want a crown, an El Dorado, and Potosi. Now, these grand lords on the other sides of the Alps frequently marry into plain families, like Jupiter. They like to cross the race. But do you wish to marry Andrea, my dear Monsieur Danglars, that you are asking so many questions? Ma foi, said Danglars, it would not be a bad speculation. And you know I am a speculator. You're not thinking of Mademoiselle Danglars, I hope. You would not like poor Andrea to have his throat cut by Albert. Albert, repeated Danglars, shrugging his shoulders. Ah, well, he would care very little about it, I think. But he is betrothed to your daughter, I believe. Well, Monsieur de Morcerf and I have talked about this marriage, but Madame de Morcerf and Albert, you do not mean to say that it would not be a good match? Indeed, I imagine that Mademoiselle Danglars is as good as Monsieur de Morcerf. Mademoiselle Danglars' fortune will be great, no doubt, especially if the telegraph should not make any more mistakes. Oh, I do not mean her fortune only. But tell me, what? Why did you not invite Monsieur and Madame de Morcerf to your dinner? I did so, but he excused himself on account of Madame de Morcerf being obliged to go to Dieppe for the benefit of sea air. Yes, said Danglars, laughing. It would do her a great deal of good. Why so? Because it is the air she always breathed in her youth. Monte Cristo took no notice of this ill-natured remark. But still, if Albert be not so rich as Mademoiselle Danglars, said the Count, you must allow that he has a fine name. So he has, but I like mine as well. Certainly, your name is popular and does honor to the title they have adorned it with, but you are too intelligent not to know that according to a prejudice, too firmly rooted to be exterminated, a nobility which dates back 5 centuries is worth more than one that can only reckon 20 years. And for this very reason, said Danglars with a smile, which he tried to make sardonic, I prefer Monsieur Andrea Cavalcanti to Monsieur Albert de Morcerf. Still, I should not think the Morcerfs would yield to the Cavalcanti. The Morcerfs? Stay, my dear Count, said Danglars. You are a man of the world, are you not? I think so. And you understand heraldry? A little. Well, look at my coat of arms. It is worth more than Morcerf's. Why so? Because, though I am not a baron by birth, my real name is, at least, Danglars. Well, what then? His name is not Morcerf. How? Not Morcerf? Not the least in the world. Go on. I have been made a baron, so that I actually am one. He made himself a count, so that he is not one at all. Impossible. Listen, my dear Count. Monsieur de Morcerf has been my friend, or rather my acquaintance, during the last 30 years. You know I have made the most of my arms, though I never forgot my origin. A proof of great humility, or great pride, said Monte Cristo. Well, when I was a clerk, Morcerf was a mere fisherman. And then he was called what? Fernand. Only Fernand? Fernand Mondego. You're sure? Pardieu, I have bought enough fish of him to know his name. Then why did you think of giving your daughter to him? Because Fernand and Danglars, being both parvenus, both having become noble, both rich, are about equal in worth, excepting that there have been certain things mentioned of him that were never said of me. What? Oh, nothing. Ah, yes. What you tell me recalls to mind something about the name of Fernand Mondego. I have heard that name in Greece. In conjunction with the affairs of Ali Pasha? Exactly so. This is the mystery, said Danglars. I acknowledge I would have given anything to find it out. It would be very easy if you much wished it. How so? Probably you have some correspondent in Greece? I should think so. At Yanina? Everywhere. Well, write to your correspondent in Yanina and ask him what part was played by a Frenchman named Fernand Mondego in the catastrophe of Ali Tepelini. You are right, exclaimed Danglars, rising quickly. I will write today. Do so. I will. And if you should hear of anything very scandalous, I will communicate it to you. You will oblige me. Danglars rushed out of the room and made but one leap into his coupe. End of chapter 66.
And cut. That's a wrap, folks. Thanks for listening to today's episode of I've Been Meaning to Read That, with me, your host, Dan. If you want to learn more about the show, you can follow us on Instagram at Meaning to Read and TikTok at I've Been Meaning. If you want to support the show to help keep it going, you can find me on Venmo at Dingus Donut, DINGUSDONUT. Supporters get a shout out on the show, and even more important, get to vote on the next book that we read. No matter what, I'll see you for our next episode. Until then, read those books you've been meaning to read, and have a lovely, lovely day.